All right.
Okay. So Christopher Lawrence started working with me. This is Sarah Lance. 2018, the summer of 2018 is when he started and was doing some work in the field. And then he started officially his grad studies, classes, coursework and everything the fall 2018. So he's he completed all his coursework and he's soon to take his qualifying exam for becoming an official PhD student. And so he's still pretty early on in his research, but this is already his second Falconer lecture. And so we expect great things from him, and I'll let him take it from there.
All right. Can everyone see that? Nope, I got to share my screen. Hang on. All right, can everyone see now?
Yep.
All right, thank you. As Sarah said, my name is Chris Lawrence. I'm a graduate student at the Atmospheric Sciences Research Center at the University of Albany. And today I'm going to be talking to you about the role that clouds play in atmospheric chemistry, our current understanding, ongoing research in the field, and future work we'll be doing at Whiteface Mountain to answer many of these research questions. So to give you a brief overview of the talk, I'll be discussing three very broad but important topics related to cloud water chemistry: acid deposition, the role clouds play with aerosol formation and transformation, nitrogen deposition, and then I'll discuss briefly about some of the future work we'll be doing at Whiteface Mountain to address some of these topics. So to start, I think it's worth discussing the roles of clouds, the importance of clouds play in the atmosphere. They play a very critical role in regulating our climate through the reflection of solar radiation. They play an important role in the hydrological cycle through precipitation and the transport of water vapor across the planet. And they often can be they can cleanse the atmosphere by removing atmospheric pollutants during precipitation events. And they're ever present in our atmosphere as they can approximately cover 60% of the globe on average. So you can pretty much anywhere you look, you'll find a cloud. And their formation processes are very complicated as they involve macro processes that span meters, if not hundreds to thousands of kilometers. But they also involve very important microscopic processes as well, making it quite difficult to constrain their processes. And they, of course, play a very crucial role in atmospheric chemistry. First, I think I'll start with something I think people who've been involved in the Adirondack community are very well aware of, and it's the problems of acid rain. This is where cloud water chemistry really became an important role in the atmospheric sciences. The plot on the left here is a plot from the National Atmospheric Deposition Program showing the average rainwater pH in 1985. And as you can see on the eastern United States here, many of these pHs are 4 and below. And it's worth reviewing how pH works. Neutral water has a pH of 7, and as the number gets lower, your sample becomes more and more acidic. It's also important to point out that it's on a log scale, meaning that a pH of 4 is 10 times more acidic than a pH of 5. So the eastern United States in 1985 was 10 times more acidic than the western United States. And this was causing many significant ecosystem problems, both in the Adirondacks and many parts of the globe. For instance, it was leading to pretty much lakes that were once filled with fish and aquatic invertebrates basically going dead. And it also had significant but complicated negative effects on terrestrial ecosystems and forest health. So these growing problems really drove the need to understand the formation processes of acid rain. And it was discovered that not only is acid rain or the role that clouds play with acid rain isn't just the precipitation of these acids, but it's also critical in their formation. You have precursor gases such as sulfur dioxide that are emitted largely from the burning of fossil fuels, specifically coal. And these gases can actually dissolve into cloud droplets and react with water, and then react with oxidants such as hydrogen peroxide, ozone, and trace metals like iron to form strong acids like sulfuric acid, which then, of course, lowers the rainwater pH and causes the significant ecosystem problems. So this discovery actually led to significant regulations through the Clean Air Act amendments. And these two plots are from the EPA showing nitrogen dioxide and sulfur dioxide trends from 1980 to 2019, showing that these amendments actually did quite a good job in regulating these important precursor gases, with a 62% decrease from 1980 to 2019 for nitrogen dioxide, though it's worth pointing out that those concentrations have been relatively flat since 2009 or about, and a 92% decrease in sulfur dioxide concentrations since 1980, showing the effectiveness of these regulations. And now we're starting to see signs of recovery from acid rain. The plot on the left here is the same plot as I showed previously from the National Atmospheric Deposition Program, but instead it shows rainwater for the year 2018. And as you can see, the eastern United States showing pHs in the 5s and higher, which means that the rainwater is 10 times less acidic than it was in 1985. And in conjunction, concentrations of Whiteface Mountain cloud water, which is a monitoring program of cloud water that's been going on since 1994, has shown that cloud water pH has increased 2 pH units, meaning that it's 100 times less acidic. And in conjunction, sulfate and nitrate concentrations have been decreasing over time as well, highlighting the success of these regulations. And there has been significant signs showing that, or there are signs that these ecosystems in the Adirondacks and other places around the globe are starting to recover. However, it's very important to point out here that these ecosystems have faced a lot of damage and remain very sensitive to even small perturbations in acid deposition. So it's really important that we continue these regulations, and if not, make them more stringent to allow these ecosystems to recover properly. And these reductions in sulfate have led to a significant shift in research focus in the atmospheric chemistry world. So now I'm switching to aerosols, which have actually been changing largely to these regulations affecting acid rain. And aerosols are a huge topic in the atmospheric chemistry world. They're generally thought of as atmospheric particles with an enormous size range, with sizes anywhere between 10 nanometers all the way up to about a millimeter, which spans 5 orders of magnitude. And they have very profound effects on air quality, as these particles, especially the very small particles, are very dangerous to breathe in and can cause respiratory and cardiovascular problems for people. They also have an important role in climate and visibility as these aerosols can interact with solar radiation. And of course, they have an important role in ecosystem effect, as these aerosols can deposit down to the earth and causing negative ecosystem problems. These aerosols are very chemically complex. They contain many different classes of compounds, which all have different sources and all have very different chemical aging processes, making them very difficult to constrain. In addition to this, aerosols can be either directly emitted from the earth through things like dust and sea salt, or they can be formed from precursor gases that are generally anthropogenic in origin, which then can go through chemistry in the atmosphere and condense into these particles. So a great example of the way these aerosols can affect visibility and climate is looking at haze events in very remote regions. This is a great example of Arctic haze, the Alaskan Arctic, that has, you would think these airs are very pristine, but you can get these situations where polluted air is transported from other parts of the globe to the Arctic, which cause these hazing events. And you can get sort of the same thing at Whiteface Mountain, a great example of this in 2017, where you get aerosol pollution that's transported across the United States and causes visibility issues at Whiteface. So aerosols have many important natural sources. They can come from wildfires, though you could argue humans have a very important role to play in wildfires these days. They can come from biological sources like pollen. They can come from little bubbles that come from waves in the ocean, creating like sodium chloride aerosols. And then you can also get an important source from volcanoes. And of course, you can get an important source of natural aerosols is from dust. And if you've been paying attention to the news the past few weeks, you might have heard about a story of a really bad dust storm that hit the southern United States, causing very bad air quality. And it turns out that this dust actually came from the Saharan desert. And this is a great example, actually, that these pollutants that are emitted can travel thousands of kilometers to affect air quality downwind. So your pollution that's emitted isn't just local, but it can also be global. And of course, there are anthropogenic contributions to aerosols as well. You can directly get aerosols emitted through the burning of fossil fuels for transportation and energy production that can create things like soot and sulfate aerosols, and they can also contain toxic trace metals that are also very unhealthy to breathe in. And then, of course, they can also release important precursor gases. And agriculture actually has a very significant role to play, especially with its emissions of ammonia. So the question here is, well, how does any of this relate to clouds? And in two very major ways. Aerosol properties are very important in the formation of clouds. And then in turn, clouds can then affect the properties of aerosols. As you've seen before, sulfate can be created through cloud water chemistry. This is one great example of how clouds can affect aerosol composition. And this has very important implications for climate warming scenarios. Sorry about that. So it's worth reviewing on how exactly you make a cloud in the atmosphere. And you need three important ingredients. One ingredient includes, important ingredient is water vapor, which makes sense. And the second is you need rapid cooling to cause the relative humidity to get above 100% to create supersaturation for water to condense. And you basically get this in two ways in the atmosphere. You can get this from convection through a meteorological event, or you can get it from through mechanical lift with air going over a mountain, a process called orographic lift. And this is a great example of orographic lift. This is an orographic cloud being formed at Whiteface Mountain. Play this video a couple of times. So as you can see here, as the air is being lifted up the mountain, the air cools. Which drops the relative humidity to supersaturation, or increases the relative humidity to supersaturation levels. The water condenses and forms a cloud. And as it comes back down the mountain, it warms up, the relative humidity decreases, and the cloud dissipates. However, it's really important to point out that there is not enough water vapor in the atmosphere for these clouds to form cloud droplets at the sizes that we see. So a third critical component here are aerosols, or in this specific case, cloud condensation nuclei. The way they play a role is that you have your rapid cooling that increases the relative humidity, and the aerosols can act as a seed, which can let the water start condensing onto the aerosol at much lower relative humidities. And as the relative humidity gets a little bit above 100%, you get this rapid condensation and with the formation of a cloud droplet, which can make the aerosol grow 10 to 100 times bigger in size. The chemical composition and the size of that aerosol plays a very crucial role in the size of the droplet that's formed. So this is a great chart to show how aerosols and aerosol cloud interactions interact with our climatic system. So as I showed before, aerosols can scatter or absorb solar radiation depending on the chemical composition of the aerosol. And of course, clouds are capable of reflecting solar radiation as well. However, when you have a cloud that is affected by significant air pollution, aerosol pollution specifically, you get smaller but more cloud droplets, which actually allows the cloud to reflect more solar radiation. So a polluted cloud actually leads to a more significant net cooling effect than a less polluted cloud. These polluted clouds can also lead to the suppression of rain because these cloud droplets are too small to actually form precipitation. You can also increase the size of the cloud and its cloud height. You can increase the amount of time that the cloud actually exists in the atmosphere, increasing the amount of time it's leading to a cooling effect. And depending on the type of aerosol you have, if it's a dark aerosol that absorbs solar radiation, it can actually cause cloud droplets to evaporate off, reducing the cloud's lifetime, showing that aerosol cloud interactions are very complicated and have many different effects. And a great example to show how complicated they are is this very famous figure from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, looking at radiative forcing of climate between 1750 and 2011. There's a lot going on in this chart, but basically what it says, it breaks down the different atmospheric components and how they contribute to climate change. So on the example here on the right represents warming, and you have something like CO2, which makes sense, has a very significant warming effect. If we go down to aerosol radiation and aerosol cloud interactions, you can see they have very significant cooling effects. However, I point here to their error bars. These error bars represent the uncertainty with these processes. And these error bars, especially the aerosol cloud interactions, are bigger than any of the other components, which shows the point that aerosol cloud interactions are the #1 uncertainty in future climate warming scenarios. So the question is, well, why is that the most complicated? And part of the reason for this is the chemical complexity and formation processes of aerosols. This is a great figure from Jimenez et al. In 2009, showing global distributions of aerosols and their various chemical components. As you can see, they are a mixture of many different types of compounds. In red here, you have sulfate, which of course comes from cloud water chemistry, from SO2 forming sulfate. You also have nitrate, important component, ammonium, and you can also have chloride if you have marine influences on your aerosols as well. But I want to point out that this green sliver here, and the light green, dark green, and the gray, this represents the organic carbon fraction of the aerosol. As you can see, in many parts of the globe, it's a major, if not majority fraction of the aerosol. And this actually didn't always used to be the case. During the 70s and 80s, when acid rain was a bigger problem, most people generally assumed that aerosols were mostly made of ammonium sulfate, and that in more recent years, as more stringent regulations have come into play, the organic carbon is becoming the most dominant part of the aerosol. And this paper is from 2009. This data is over 10 years old. So looking at more recent data, specifically at Whiteface Mountain, this is data collected from a former PhD student, Jia Zhang, looking at 3 different days in August 2017 at the summit of Whiteface. And the slivers here, this green part of the pie chart represents organic carbon, and it represents almost 3/4 of aerosol composition at Whiteface Mountain, with much smaller contributions from sulfate, red, and nitrate in blue, which is very different than the system used to be 20 or 30 years ago. So we keep talking about this really important growing fraction of the aerosol, so it's worth discussing what exactly organic carbon is. And it's generally thought to be the building blocks of life. We are carbon-based life forms, and it's ubiquitous in our daily life. Generally, organic carbon is made of carbon-to-carbon bonds, but they can also contain elements such as hydrogen, oxygen, sulfur, phosphorus, and a combination of all of the different combinations of these different elements. There are thousands of organic compounds that have been identified in the atmosphere, with tens of thousands thought to exist, if not maybe more, which highlights we're really only scratching the surface of the organic carbons in the atmosphere. And all of these organic compounds have different chemical and physical properties, which makes it very difficult to constrain their effects on aerosol chemical properties. Just to show how ubiquitous organic carbon is, these are compounds you can find in the atmosphere, but they're also found in our daily life. Acetone is an important component of nail polish remover. Acetic acid is an important compound of vinegar. Alpha pinene is part of that piney smell you get from your Christmas tree. Aspartic acid is an important component of amino acids and proteins. And Hank Hill's favorite organic compound in the atmosphere, propane, which is of course used for grilling. And just a side note for those not as don't know as much about organic chemistry, you might see some of the shorthand throughout this talk. These molecules can get really big, so it's worth using shorthand drawing. So each time you see an intersection here, that represents a carbon bond, and if there's any other types of bonds, they'll state it. So if there's an oxygen bond, you'll see that within the carbon skeleton there. So I've been going on about organic aerosols, and I really want to discuss a huge uncertainty in the atmosphere, our secondary organic aerosols. An important fraction of the mass from organic aerosols does come from primary sources, from pollen, biomass burning, fossil fuel burning, etc. But the majority of this organic fraction actually comes from secondary sources. And by secondary sources, I mean precursor gases undergoing chemistry driven by the sun to cause aerosol growth. Specifically with these secondary organic aerosols, they're formed from the atmospheric oxidation of volatile organic carbon or compounds, or VOCs. And these VOCs are highly complicated as their sources and what control their sources are very complicated. Their identification is very difficult. And the chemistry that they undergo is also very highly uncertain, which all play a significant role in secondary organic aerosol formation uncertainty. So just looking at the different sources of VOCs, there's of course anthropogenic sources of VOCs. You of course can get them from the burning of fossil fuels through energy production and transportation, but a really significant and often majority fraction comes through industrial processes of creating chemicals. And actually not an important source of these VOCs, especially on indoor quality, can come from your cleaning products that you might find under your sink. On the right here, formaldehyde, benzene, toluene are really good examples of anthropogenically released VOCs. But the other very important form of secondary organic aerosol precursors are biogenic VOCs. You can get biogenic VOCs from wildfires. They can release compounds like 2-furaldehyde, which is a very common compound coming from wildfires. But a critical component is coming from plant and tree respiration. When these plants undergo things like photosynthesis, they can release compounds like VOCs, while they also release oxygen. They can release compounds like isoprene and alpha-pinene. And they can also release these VOCs actually in response to perturbations such as invasive insects or climate change. And I think a surprising fact here is that biogenic emissions account for 90% of all VOCs that are emitted globally, which is kind of surprising. You would think a gas like this would be largely anthropogenically driven, but in most places this isn't true unless you're in a very large city. So the process of the formation of secondary organic aerosols is you take your VOC that's emitted from its various sources, and it undergoes chemical gas phase oxidation. And this oxidation process actually makes these VOCs a little less volatile. They don't want to stay as gases as easily. And as they undergo more and more oxidation, they start to stick to existing aerosols. Once they're on the aerosol, they can continue to undergo even more chemistry that makes them less and less and less volatile by either adding oxygens or by forming carbon-to-carbon bonds, which makes them heavier and thus less volatile. But the problem is, despite significant progress in understanding the formation of secondary organic aerosols, we're missing a significant fraction using this framework. This plot shows the measured secondary organic aerosols found in the atmosphere divided by the secondary organic aerosols that can be predicted by chemical models. And it shows, at best, we underestimate secondary organic aerosols when there are models by about 10 times. And as you allow more and more time for more chemistry to happen, these uncertainties get worse and worse, with underestimating secondary organic aerosols by up to 100 times, which really begs the question, these models are missing a very critical source here. What would this source be? Tying that back to clouds, clouds could be a potential source here. And in the year 2000, a hypothesis was made that cloud and fog droplets could be an important source or an important contributor to secondary organic aerosol formation. And this hypothesis, and much of the future work that would go into this, shows that it works very similar to the gas phase formation. You take your volatile organic carbon or compound, and it undergoes similar gas phase chemistry, adding oxygens to the VOC. These VOCs are less volatile, but they're still too volatile to actually stick to these existing particles. However, they're very water soluble. So these can actually dissolve into cloud droplets, fog droplets, or wet aerosols and interact with water and then oxidants such as ozone or iron to form many different types of organic compounds that are less volatile than when they entered the cloud water originally. And once the cloud droplet evaporates, the gases actually stay on the aerosol, and you've actually led to aerosol growth. Within a cloud's lifetime, an aerosol can go through many cycles of condensation and evaporation, which really can complicate the chemistry as you're switching between aqueous chemistry and gas phase chemistry. So the question here is, how important is this process actually on aerosols? And a great review paper from Barbara Irvings, who's a very influential figure in the cloud chemistry world, found that aqueous formation of secondary organic aerosols could be almost as important as gas phase secondary organic aerosols, which shows that these aqueous processes are required if you're going to predict secondary organic aerosol mass properly. And to add to all of these uncertainties and increasing importance of organic carbon within aerosols, the growing importance of the organic fraction of aerosols, we actually might be seeing a growing trend in water-soluble organic carbon in Whiteface Mountain cloud water, the line in green here. So not only is the organic fraction becoming more important on the aerosol, we actually might be seeing more organic carbon in our atmosphere also. So understanding these formation processes is possibly becoming more important, and we're not really sure why water-soluble organic carbon is actually increasing in our cloud water. It could possibly be due to increasing wildfire activity in the western United States, but as of right now, we don't have definitive proof of that. So now I want to switch to another topic that's somewhat related to the previous two, nitrogen deposition, more specifically ammonium deposition. This is a complicated but great figure highlighting the complexity of the nitrogen cycle on our planet. You can have sources from biomass burning, you can get it from crops and livestock, you can have terrestrial sources and aquatic sources, and just showing some of the complicated processes of processing it in the atmosphere. And this is becoming a growing problem worldwide. Global ammonium emissions are on the rise, and this is largely due to overuse of fertilizers to feed a growing population. And in the United States, ammonium emissions seem to be remaining relatively flat, and yet in 37 out of 50 states in the United States, ammonium deposition, wet deposition, has been increasing, or at least increased from the 1990s to the 2010s. Nitrate deposition has decreased, which is thanks to the Clean Air Act amendments related to acid deposition regulations. But ammonium deposition is becoming an increasing problem. And nitrogen deposition, while it can be a nutrient for ecosystems, too much of it can be very harmful. When combined with phosphate pollution, for instance, nitrogen deposition can lead to things such as harmful algal blooms. This is an image of Lake Erie, so not too far away from here. And this green haze here in the water represents a harmful algal bloom in 2013. When you add too much nitrogen combined with phosphate pollution, you can get these harmful algal blooms. And these harmful algal blooms can release deadly toxins that not only affect the aquatic ecosystems, but they're actually harmful to people as well, which is making this a public health crisis on top of everything. You can also get eutrophication from nitrogen deposition, where these microorganisms actually sap the oxygen out of these aquatic ecosystems, basically killing everything in it, which is a huge problem. And nitrogen deposition can also have very negative effects on plant and terrestrial plant biodiversity. And reductions of biodiversity makes ecosystems less capable of reacting to huge changes such as climate change. This one paper referring to slight reductions in nitrogen deposition, largely coming from nitrate deposition. Our results suggest that currently reductions in emissions will achieve no more than modest increases in species richness by 2030. The effects of nitrogen deposition on biodiversity are severe and are unlikely to be quickly reversed, which is sort of a similar story to acid deposition. So nitrogen deposition, of course, plays a very key role in ecosystem health. And in addition to its dangers, nitrogen deposition could be changing, largely due to changes in the aerosol. So reductions in sulfate is changing how ammonia can interact with aerosols and cloud water. As I showed before, aerosols were generally thought in the past, when acid rain was a much bigger problem, to be mostly ammonium sulfate. And if you look in early years when the restrictions were being put into place, ammonium largely followed the same trends as sulfate and nitrate. However, around 2009, ammonium seems to diverge from sulfate, almost in collaboration with water-soluble organic carbon. It has been shown that ammonium can form organic acids or react with organic carbon compounds like organic acids, such as oxalic acid, to form salts. So the way that ammonium is interacting with the aerosol phase seems to be changing. And it's unclear currently how deposition of nitrogen is going to change while we continue to see reductions of sulfate and potentially increases in organic carbon, at least at Whiteface Mountain. And we might even possibly be seeing an increasing trend in cloud water ammonium. However, this trend is a bit noisy and a bit hard to interpret, so that still is going to require significant investigation. And then there's another component of nitrogen deposition that contains a lot more uncertainty, and that's the fraction of organic nitrogen. Organic nitrogen follows many of the same uncertainties that I discussed during the formation of secondary organic aerosols. They can actually be an important component of secondary organic aerosols. But they're, of course, an important component of nitrogen deposition as well. They can share sources with ammonium, but they can also be formed in the atmosphere with nitrogen reacting with organic compounds to form organic nitrogen, whether it's in the gas phase, the aerosol phase, or in cloud water. And it makes up, organic nitrogen makes up approximately around 25% of total nitrogen deposition flux, at least according to this study, and it can make up to 80% over marine ecosystems. And organic nitrogen is not regularly monitored, or these compounds are not regularly identified. So there's a lot about these processes that we don't know right now. So this remains a very significant uncertainty within nitrogen deposition. So I've been discussing some of the big research questions and topics in the atmospheric chemistry world. And now I want to discuss how what we're doing at Whiteface Mountain will be attempt to answer some of these questions. And we're really going at this in three different ways. We're doing field experiments at Whiteface Mountain. We're also doing laboratory experiments. And then we're also combining these with chemical modeling. These three frameworks actually feed into each other and can learn from each other. So to start with the field experiments, we're going to continue the cloud water monitoring program that's been going since 1994. Just a very brief overview of our cloud water collection system. We use a Ammonium omnidirectional passive cloud water collector that deploys Teflon strings when these four meteorological parameters are met. You have enough liquid water content and wind to push the cloud through the Teflon strings. Your temperature is greater than 2 degrees Celsius, so we don't damage the collector with ice. We also have a sensor to detect any rain, so we only look at non-precipitating clouds. As the cloud passes through the cloud water collector, the water beads up on the Teflon strings and goes down a long array of tubing into a refrigerated accumulator, which then we dump every 12 hours to run chemical analysis on. we're going to continue the regular chemicals that have been monitored in the past, like sulfate, nitrate, and ammonia. But in 2018, organic acids were added to the suite of regular measurements. Organic acids are an important component of water-soluble organic carbon. In 2018, they made up to 40% of all water-soluble organic carbon. And they can also be very important in secondary organic aerosol formation. This is the first time organic acids have been regularly monitored at Whiteface. There was one study that did investigate them in the 1980s, and a great paper, but it's quite a long time ago, so our chemical system is significantly different. So we can, by adding this class of organic compounds to the suite of measurements, we can start to investigate the formation of specific compounds within cloud water. We also want to add a couple of new instruments to the summit. First, we want to add a particle into liquid sampler system that will allow us to measure ambient aerosol. So the way this system works is that you have dry air going into a growth chamber that's combined with water vapor made from a steam generator. And as the water vapor and the temperature decreases, it acts just like a cloud would, and the water condenses onto the existing aerosols, which forms bulk water that we can then run wet chemistry on with techniques such as ion chromatography or a total organic carbon analyzer. This is a great example of a particle in the liquid sampler system from Amy Sullivan's lab in Colorado State University. And then we want to combine this with a counterflow virtual impactor. And the way this instrument works is that it brings in cloud droplets and separates them from ambient aerosols and gases. It then takes the cloud droplets and evaporates them, leaving behind the residual aerosol that the cloud activated on. You can then combine this with the pills system to then run it through the pills to actually get the chemical composition of the aerosols that the cloud droplet activated on. So we can actually start to measure the role that clouds are playing on chemical processing on these cloud condensation nuclei, which is a really great advance. So now I want to discuss some of the modeling work we're going to be doing with work at Whiteface Mountain. So first, we're starting to use high split trajectories. High split is a model created by NOAA that basically can use to simulate pollution treatment through the atmosphere. You can run this meteorological model that basically tells you where your air mass came from. And this is really critical because it can actually, if we have, say, a polluted event, we can actually track down where the pollution event came from. For instance, this is an example from July 30th, 2019 that had fairly high sulfate concentrations, much lower than we saw in the past, but fairly high for concentrations these days. And the air masses seem to fly over the Ohio River Valley, which is a place that was known for emitting a significant amount of sulfur dioxide. So this is a very useful tool for source appointment. And then the other modeling I want to discuss that we'll be doing is chemical box modeling. We're going to be working with collaborators from the National Center of Atmospheric Research, NCAR, and the Leibniz Institute for Tropospheric Research in Germany, or the TROPOS group, on chemical box modeling. This is a picture with me with one of the collaborators, Dr. Mary Barth, while we're at the American Meteorological Society this past January, where everything locked down. So what our thought process here is that we're going to combine two different models. The WRF-Chem model, which WRF stands for the Weather Research Forecasting Model, an important meteorology model that also simulates chemistry, which is very useful for looking at meteorology-chemistry interactions. And we'll use that to actually inform our chemical box models for gas and cloud chemistry. So to show you what I mean, WRF-Chem will actually simulate our emissions, meteorology, and initial conditions. And basically with the box modeling, you just throw these concentrations into a box, put in a bunch of chemical reactions, both in the gas phase and the cloud phase, and you just let it run and see, you can actually simulate chemistry within a given area. So then we'll take the results from these two different box models. We'll do comparisons with Whiteface Mountain field data. And this is great for two reasons. One, a lot of the chemistry affecting our field data is very complicated and difficult to tease out with just observations. So these models can actually give us insight on a lot of the complicated chemistry. But also, we can actually check to see how well these models are actually doing. And we can make corrections to these models to make them more accurate and make better predictions. And lastly, I want a brief overview of some of the laboratory experiments we've been doing, largely driven by our postdoctoral research, Joseph Niehaus. We're using a electrodynamic balance, which uses electric fields to actually levitate individual cloud droplets. So what we can do here is actually simulate cloud chemistry and physics in conditions that are very similar to what they would appear to be in a cloud. So we can actually see how this chemistry and physics unfolds realistically with an individual cloud droplet. And then we can use this to study complicated organic chemistry on a single droplet basis. So to summarize findings from this talk, clouds, of course, play a very important role in our climatic and atmospheric chemistry systems. Reductions of sulfate and nitrates, or NOxes, have reduced significantly the harmful effects of acid deposition, but these ecosystems still remain very sensitive to any small changes. Organic carbon has become the dominant part of aerosols, both at Whiteface Mountain and many parts of the globe, largely related to these sulfate reductions, which complicates the role that they play with air quality and climate. And there's growing evidence that clouds play a significant role that's not well understood in the chemical transformations of these secondary organic aerosols. And clouds play a very important role in nitrogen deposition as well, which has many significant negative effects on aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems, but it could possibly be changing in the future, and like the secondary organic aerosols, contains many uncertainties. And we are using fieldwork, chemical modeling, and laboratory experiments to attempt to answer some of these research questions and uncertainties. And just a few takeaways from this lecture. We have significant problems that still remain, from secondary organic aerosol formation, the growing problem of nitrogen deposition, and the always looming problem of climate change, and how climate change could actually interact with these two previous problems. However, we have made significant progress in the past with ecosystem air quality problems like reducing acid deposition. Smart policies using similar tools for acid deposition could also work to reduce our overall environmental impact. It's going to require more interdisciplinary work between researchers, engineers, policymakers, and etc. But this can actually be a really great opportunity for innovation and new types of science. And really, I think this work and other environmental work highlights the importance of environmental monitoring. The benefits of environmental monitoring aren't always completely obvious, but they're capable of finding problems that you didn't know exist. So it's important that we continue to do this environmental monitoring, even if the benefits aren't directly obvious. If you want to keep up with our research in the future, or just news about our group in general, you should visit our website. It's linked below, and I can also send out the link to everybody so they have access and they can keep up to date with our work. And I'm happy to take any questions.
So unfortunate that we can't clap for you. Really. Great job.
I had a question. I was wondering, let's say that we were able to make policies to help reduce the organic aerosols. Do we have an idea of like what the half-life of these organic aerosols are? Like how long would it take to see a reduction?
So a lot of these aerosols have lifetimes in the matter of days or weeks. So if you somehow stopped the production of these secondary organic aerosols, you would actually see significant or immediate improvements. But the controlling of these secondary organic aerosols are pretty complicated because a significant portion of their formation processes are not directly human related. You know, the 90% of VOCs come from biological sources. We only seem to be able to interact with them indirectly through processes like climate change. But there are things we can do to reduce we do release anthropogenic VOCs. If we reduce those, that would, I think, lead to immediate improvement.
Christopher, I actually had a question from pretty early on in your presentation. I don't know if you could possibly open up your slideshow again.
Yeah.
It's the map of the United States with the acid rain levels in 1985 is the slide I'm referencing. Sorry, it's always back.
Go ahead.
There, I think. No, that one. Yeah, sorry. Previous problem. So obviously the Northeast was hit pretty hard by acid rain, largely because of industrialism. But I'm just curious as to why in the West Coast, even in high population centers, that it's not nearly as bad. Like obviously like West Texas and the Dakotas aren't super populated, so won't be as bad. But how come like Los Angeles isn't as bad, or Dallas, for instance?
No, these are good questions. They just had a lot less coal burning than the eastern United States does. Population density does play a significant role here too, but there's just less coal burning out there. And the major contributor to acid rain comes from sulfur dioxide, and coal burning is it's the main source of that. At least it was in the past. I'm not sure if
Chris, another quickie on that is animals, agriculture, and ammonia.
Oh yeah, ammonium.
Lot more cattle ranching and animals and ammonia emissions in the Midwest and West.
That's a very good point. Yeah, the ammonium acts kind of as a base to neutralize the acid, so there's a lot more of it available.
That makes sense. Okay. Thank you, Christopher. That was really interesting.
Hey, Chris, it's Rich. Really, really good talk. And I can sort of visualize now more what you and Sarah are doing, which is neat. And it was quite eye-opening that the biogenic organic carbon was so predominant. And it was making me think that there's, one would expect a seasonal cycle and also with the fire. And would there be any value in collecting rime, which is supercool water drops that turn into ice and grow on everything at Whiteface? And it would be good for us to have things to do in the winter as well. And I know Gannett Haller has collected rime, and I know the concentrations are low in the things that she measures, but I don't know much about it. And would that be something that would be helpful to sort of tease out the seasonal cycle of the biogenic part of the organic carbon?
Well, I mean, if I would expect the concentrations of organic carbon to be pretty darn low, as you imply that with this, there is definitely a seasonal cycle in these VOCs. It'd be a fun project. It's more work, and the cloud water does keep us pretty darn busy. But I think you could get some valuable information out of that. It's just, obviously we can't collect in the winter because the collector would get damaged as well from the rhyming.
It would be easy to collect rime at Gannett's collectors look like tennis rackets, basically. And as the wind blows through, it builds up huge amounts of ice. We can get inches thick of ice overnight. It's kind of like stiff snow. It's not really watery ice. So it is easy to collect, but it, like you say, it's just another thing to do.
Oh, an interesting study could come from that is, the wildfire season usually extends well beyond when we collect. It extends late into the fall. We have to stop collecting at the end of September because we start to run into freezing temperatures at the summit. I'm sure during a biomass burning event that ice could potentially have a significant amount of organic carbon in it. So that actually could be very interesting to study, and something I don't know that's, at least for biomass burning, has been done at Whiteface. Anyone else?
Well, Chris, I'd just like to say thank you, Chris. You did a great job.
Oh, thank you.
Yep, this is Janie, Chris. It was a really great job, and I just want to say I'm glad you're studying clouds, because that leaves all your clear nights free for astronomy.
Yeah, it's perfect. I'm never not happy.
Well, thank you for everybody for coming. We had quite a few people that came, so yeah. I think I stopped at 33. So great job inviting all your family.
It helps.
It was good.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious who your brother is.
Yeah, we get that a lot.
We're figuring this method of lectures out. I think this was a great one, and we'll see if we can't do the same thing in 2 weeks for Phil's.
Yeah, it seems to go pretty smoothly once you get the technology to work the way you want it to.
You did great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good night.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher.
Yep.
Talk to you later.
Talk to you later.